My guest today is Ribal Ragheb. Ribal is part of Salesforce, the global leader in customer relationship management. Not only did Salesforce transform sales and marketing, but also technology, pioneering software as a service and cloud computing at a time when it was still the exception. Today, it's the norm. Being one of the most advanced and influential CRM companies of all time, a lot of the current CRM systems, processes, and culture are coming from them. With 80,000 employees in 2023, 26 billion annual revenue in 2022, and 215 billion market capitalization, when recording this conversation, Salesforce enables us to discover how a well-resourced, data-driven organization thinks enablement, specifically on one of its core activities, and in the case of an organization that sets the tone globally on these topics. In this episode, we talk about 1. Offering enablement and demonstrating its value. 2. How to deliver enablement. And 3. How to deliver it. If you want to say a few words about what you do, who you think you are, it would be great.
Sure. So my name is Ribal. I currently work for Salesforce in the Enablement org. I've been at Salesforce for 4.5 years. Before that, all of my career has been in tech sales, I would say, from Google to Facebook and now Salesforce. And I made the switch to enablement within Salesforce. So now I'm based out of Madrid. Most of my career had been in Dublin, and just happy to share anything that's worthwhile.
Cool. Lovely. Can you tell me what it means, enablement at Salesforce? Like, what does it look like in terms of tasks or projects you run?
Yeah. So I used to do what they call onboarding, which is basically upskilling all of the new joiners within the sales organization. Newcomers, how do we operate at Salesforce? What's important for you to know? What is our methodology? What are some resources that are available to you? That kind of thing. And since I've switched into what they call onwards onboarding, which is basically upskilling the existing user base of like account executives and solution engineers and the like. So any specific topic related to sales, whether that is impactful executive communication or connected vision workshops, etc. These are the kind of courses or programs that we run for our users internally.
Gotcha. So it's only sales skills, or you do also like soft skills, like for instance, how to manage your emotions? Um,
No, so we do some soft skills, but they're related to sales, right? So how to be an impactful storyteller. You could make the argument for it being more of a soft skill kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it is within the context of sales. As soft as it is still related to the main job element that they're supposed to be operating on.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And how do you do it? Is it in person? Is it online? Everything is online?
Yeah, so at the moment, everything is online. It made the switch during the pandemic. Before that, it used to be in-person trainings for onboarding specifically. They used to fly all of the new joiners from across EMEA onto one central hub, which back then used to be Madrid. Yeah, I think partly because it's much, much cheaper than Dublin, and also because a lot of people end up working out of Dublin. So it's just to show them something different. So yeah, it's a combination of both. But during the pandemic, we made the switch to virtual, obviously, because that was the only thing that was available to us. And I think since then they realized that it's a much cheaper option. So they kept going after the pandemic. At the moment, they're looking at bringing some onboarding or some upskilling back into in-person trainings because they feel that the engagement is there. And especially for the new joiners, it is more worthwhile because what happens is they miss out on the culture element of things when you join remotely and you don't get to go into an office and see exactly what it's like, especially in headquarters, whether that is EMEA headquarters or the headquarters in San Francisco. So I think they felt that a lot of people were missing out on that element. And so they brought it back. They're bringing it back now, actually. So they're in the process of rolling it out.
Hmm. And did you see a change in the metrics you measure in terms of the engagement, or was it more like a gut feeling of, hey, we feel it's not great?
Yeah, I guess it was more of a gut feeling. It's hard to gauge engagement and put quantifiable metrics to it because how are you really going to get it? Is it just by minutes spoken by the learners? I don't think that's a very good gauge of how much engagement you get in the session, but it was more about the people delivering the session saying that, yeah, you do lose out on a lot by it being virtual. But at the same time, it does have its advantages, right? So not everybody has the time to make it in person every single time. There's that element also. So yeah, from my own perspective, some trainings can be done online. There's no need for it to be in person, but some trainings you miss out on a lot by it not being in person.
Hmm. And is it always synchronous? Like, is it always live training, or is sometimes they do training through videos?
So internally at Salesforce, there's a lot of async training, right? So they have a platform called Trailhead, and a lot of people are encouraged to go and just at your own pace ingest the learning that's there. It's a mix of just text-based training, I would say, video trainings, and also more engaging sandbox environments where you're supposed to take actions on a demo environment of a particular Salesforce instance or whatever. So there is a lot of that. But when it comes to training being given, it's mostly synchronous, I would say, even though that includes some pre work. So they would have to come prepared with some courses that they take or some assets that they have to go through before getting to the session. So that element is asynchronous, but at the same time, the session itself is being given live
Hmm.
because you get to ask your own questions. You get to have answers that are a bit more tailored to you as opposed to the static content that doesn't really allow for that kind of interaction.
Yeah. And how do you know they've got the training right? Do you test them afterwards? Is there a kind of certification process?
So for some of it, there is a certification process. A lot of the certification goes through the direct manager. So they would have to either bring a deliverable and make a presentation out of it, kind of thing, to showcase the skills that they learned. But other than that, a lot of the trainings don't really have certification. It's more because it's on a voluntary basis, people signing up to upskill on certain topics. You don't really want to add that layer to it because they took willingly the step of signing up for these trainings. But everything that's related more to onboarding also ends in a certification because as they're ramping up in the job, you want to be able to make sure that they know what they're talking about before like being face to face with the clients, for instance.
Hmm.
So you want to have that level of baseline knowledge, I would say, before entering the real world. And that's how they test for that is through the certification process. Yeah.
Gotcha. You don't have to answer all the questions because I don't want you to share Salesforce secrets. But I guess when people do the onwards training, you could almost look at their sales numbers, like if the pipeline is growing or if the actual revenue numbers of the guys who have joined those trainings and completed the trainings. You probably can see I don't know if you see a bump because there are so many. I think the key thing when you do those kind of enablement programs is it's hard to say what is the main contribution to the changes? Is it the training or is it because they're taking the training because also they're more interested? So it's yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
how do you do these things?
the thing is, yeah, it is a bit convoluted, right? Because it is a bit of an intangible thing that you're bringing. Especially enablement is considered as a cost center, right? It's not a revenue generating business unit. So you have to justify your existence within the company because you don't generate any revenue. And the way that this is done is across the board and across the industry, I would say for enablement itself, the quantifiable element that you try to put on it is what we call OPM, for instance. That's one of them is onboarding performance metrics. And there's the equivalent to it for onwards kind of trainings, which is more related to their activities and their impact on the business post training, right? And the way that this happens is by implementing these metrics, it's exactly as you describe it, right? So you try to measure their performance pre and post enablement in order for you to measure the impact that you've had on their performance in the business. So how much better did they get at their jobs after attending one of your training. And that can be through the impact that they have on pipeline generation, on deals closed, on the deal cycle length, for instance. So all of these things are what we keep an eye out on, I would say, in order to understand, did we have an impact on people's onboarding or on them being able to perform in their job?
Gotcha. What do you do specifically yourself as part of the enablement team? Do you present? Do you build the content? How is your contribution?
So personally, I deliver the content. I do have a say a bit in how it's shaped while it's being designed, because at the end of the day, we're the people on the ground, right? We're the ones in front of the learners and we know what sticks and what doesn't. And especially related to things like so the engagement that you get in during the session, right? So the activities, the interactive activities that you're plugging into the session, we know what works. And this is not something that's specific to Salesforce, but it's something that's specific to most American based companies, is that a lot of the content, and you know that firsthand, right? A lot of the content is created in the US and then shipped globally. And it's not necessarily localized to fit the needs of your local markets. So at the end of the day, we end up doing a lot of that, because what else are you going to do? If they give you examples that are very American, or the activities that
Yeah.
they do, they tend to be a lot more cheerful than we are here in EMEA, I would say, or even in APAC. So realistically, you do have to do a lot of localization in order for that content to fit the audience that you
Mm.
have globally.
Yeah. So you do this redesign, let's say. You renovate the content. You don't build, but
Exactly.
you renovate.
Exactly. So we don't build, but we do shape it so that it fits our needs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you work on enablement before the pandemic, or you start with it during the pandemic?
So I started during it's weird because I joined the team like a couple of months before the pandemic actually started. So I got to go to San Francisco to attend the program that I was going to be delivering in India. So I went there for a week. And then the first week that I was supposed to deliver the content, I had to fly here to Madrid because I was still based out of Dublin back then. So I had to fly here to Madrid because that was the hub where we're doing the enablement. And that Monday that I was flying was the day that they announced kind of the pandemic throughout Europe, and they had a no fly. It wasn't yet a no fly, but they announced kind of quarantine in Europe. And so I still flew here and I was here for a week, but we had to send the learners back home. Some of them had already landed in Madrid. So we had to send them back home, and we delivered the training virtually with all the team being here in Madrid, but all the learners being back home. So it's
Mm.
a hybrid sort of setup. And I never got to actually deliver the content live because the pandemic was happening back then. And
Yeah.
that's, I was in between, but in terms of delivery, I never got to deliver to a live audience, at least that program.
Yeah, because you did train a lot of people. I remember you were training people on sales and also Spanish at Google. So it's been a while you train people. But so what's your take on the ability to learn and teach online versus physical space?
Yeah, it is weird. Obviously, the rapport that you build with your learners is going to be different. Online, you're really only talking to a screen, right? If people are at home and they're in their pajamas and they're having their cup of coffee, they feel comfortable, they don't necessarily want to interact much. It's really harder to liven up the audience, I would say, through a virtual setting. Whereas when you're in person, you can have physical activities where it's go stand over there
Yeah.
and do this and do that. From that perspective, it is a bit tougher. And I can see that from my perspective, it didn't really bother me as much because I tend to live online a lot, right? So a lot of the content that I consume is online, and a lot of what I watch is people being live online also interacting with their audiences. And that helped me a lot. But I know for a fact that a lot of people struggled with the switch because they're used to being face to face. They feed off of the lively interaction with the crowds. And
Mm.
that was all of a sudden gone. And you have to find your balance there, right? You can't really just decide what's going to happen. Yeah.
Was there anything that was done, for instance, you could see during the pandemic, like a lot of the talk shows in the US started to have studios at home And also you can see that some of the new kind of media are also investing to have new kind of studios so that the independent journalists are actually competing with CNN now. So do you see the same trend happening at Salesforce and the other big tech on investing a lot on online technical setups or frameworks so that you can make something way more interesting?
Yeah, so that happened a lot during the pandemic. We were even given budgets to purchase equipment that would make us deliver better content through virtual. So whether that is an additional desk light or a better camera or a microphone or even better routers for the internet, etc. So there was a big push for that. We were given budget to buy desks and additional monitors and all of that. So there was definitely a push for that early on in the pandemic days. Not so much now, especially because they're trying to send people back in person for a lot of the enablement that happens. It's going to be a mix of both, especially since now there's a lot being invested in other technological advancements, AI being a very big one. You don't know how that's going to play out, but there is a big investment in that. And you don't really know what shape or form this is going to take because at the end of the day, AI might have suggestions on its own, but it might also shift some processes that we're currently utilizing that might become obsolete at some point. I think at the moment, aside from investing a lot in AI, there's a holdback from people being a bit cautious because they don't necessarily know, aside from AI, what kind of direction do we want to take our company in. So
Yeah.
I don't think I see a lot of investment in that realm at the moment, even though a lot of companies, Hoot, like Zoom, like whatever, made bank right during the pandemic because these are interactivity tools that you can use while being virtual. I don't think
What's the
that
name? You said Zoom, you said another one. Kahoot?
Kahoot. Yeah.
I didn't
Uh,
know them.
it's basically just a question and answer game that you can play online. So you, as the moderator, get to create the questionnaire, and it's one question after the other, and they have to be quick in selecting the right answer, etc. And then at the end, you have a podium. There's music playing in the background, blah blah blah. So these are the tools that you'd use during the pandemic because you have to be in a virtual setting, and these are the companies that made a lot of money throughout, right? I think Kahoots, they launched they sunsetted their free version, their free license that used to be the standard before the pandemic. But because they saw such a big jump in people utilizing the platform and everybody was utilizing the free version, they're like, how can we make money off of that? Just sunset the
Yeah.
free version and make people pay for it. So that was, yeah, how it happened. But I don't think that's a trend that's going to keep going very much after the pandemic. A lot of people, even a lot of workers that I know, they want to go back to in office, right? They don't want to be fully remote anymore. Yeah, that
Do
kind
they have kids?
of. Yeah, actually, they do. And I
Strange.
completely understand that.
Cool. Okay. And anything physical in terms of innovation? So you were saying it was good when we were in the office to be able to move through the space and have some physical connections. Do you see innovation in that space where you connect a device on your desk and things happen? Because Kahoot is still mouse and keyboard, so it's limited in terms of physical interactions.
Yeah.
Have you seen anything?
I know that there's a big push for everything related to metaverse or equivalent, right? Where people are physical in a virtual setting. You're sitting across the same meeting table, you're in the same virtual room, etc. How big is this going to be? I honestly don't know. Maybe the tech sector will adopt it to a certain degree, but I don't see more traditional industries adopting something like this just because I don't see bankers sitting at the same table, maybe for some meetings, etc. But I just don't see it really becoming a thing.
I'll play this in 10 years.
I might be completely way off, right? And I'm happy to be proven wrong. But at the end of the day, physical interaction can be replaced to a certain degree. But you and I, we can talk on the phone and we can FaceTime, for instance, but it's not the same as having a weekend away and being
Yeah,
able
yeah,
to
totally not.
do things together. To a certain degree, that's not going to be replaced. But hey, dystopian future sci-fi movies have shown us that there might be a way. So
Yeah,
who knows?
yeah. Yeah, so to go to what you do with the guys, so you reshape your training materials. How do you catch people's attention at the beginning of a training session? What's your secret to connect with the audience quickly? Because you don't have much time, right? They come for an hour, they're hungry for the content, but they don't have much attention. How do you do it?
Yeah, it's very much, I think from my perspective, it's very much a personal style sort of thing. I remember, for instance, when I was still doing my graduate degree, we had a session that, not even a session, but an entire course related to public speaking. And I remember that particular teacher, he'd walk in the room every day. Everybody was talking, having side conversations, whatever. And in order to grab our attention, he just jumped straight into a story. And he started saying, by the way, today, while I was coming here in the car, this happened to me, right? And people tend to stop what they're doing because they want to listen to that story. And then after it's done, completely unrelated to the course, he'd start his session and everybody was now paying attention. So that could be one way that you grab the attention. I sometimes utilize that. Again, when you're in a virtual setting, you have to adapt because if you jump into a story and people have their cameras turned off, they're on mute and they're just doing their own thing, does it really grab their attention? That's up for you to decide. It depends a lot on the audience. I personally tend to take the humor route, right? Just really trying to throw in a couple jokes about anything that's happening today and then just jump straight into it. I think while being virtual, you have to bring very high energy, which isn't necessarily always the case in person. And I think that's one of the main differences here. And so, yeah, I try to be high energy just for people to pay a bit more attention. And that's really how I try to grab their attention. But yeah, I think it's a very much a personal style thing. I have a colleague of mine who when she jumps into a session, she changes the level of voice a lot. So sometimes she'll go down to a whisper and then you have to pay attention to what she's saying. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's like, all right, activity time. And then she's over the top. So it's really about what you think works for you and what really works with your personality style and your delivery style as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about it's already hard to control. It's not the right word, but to
Or
understand and relate. I guess it's like you get in a room, you understand where everyone is at, and then based on that, you take action and
yeah,
you start relating to people. And online, you can't do that because, as you said, like people are doing different things. So you need to wait for people to arrive again. And in person, how do you do it? If you go a bit deeper and you dissect it, how does it look like?
grabbing the attention, you mean? Or
Yeah, the first few minutes because they judge you, right? They don't. Some of them they know you already because you're one of the enablers. But let's say that the person doesn't know. You just come in the room. It's like what's happening?
yeah, I think this is twofold, right? I think part of it is you showing them why you have the credentials to be enabling them on something, right? So I tend to use my experience, for instance, because a lot of the enablement that I do is related to sales and I have a lot of experience in that, right? I worked for the biggest companies in sales. I was able to go through the ranks, whatever, and I've been through what they're going for. So showing empathy there, they're going through that enablement. They're joining Salesforce for the first time. And I can definitely relate to that. Like I joined Salesforce in a similar position to them and I know what they're going through. And then the other thing is making it clear from a very early stage what's in it for them, right? Like, why are they here? Um, None of us are here to because we find it fun. We're not here just to have a good time, but we're here because you made a conscious decision to join this company. And now it's time to understand how we operate kind of thing. And this is what I'm here to teach you. So for in order for you to be successful in your role, you need to be listening to me. And that's the bottom line. So at the end of the day, the people who aren't paying attention are making conscious decision to say, I'm going to waste 2 or 3 hours of my time right now listening to this guy talk while I'm half paying attention or not at
Yeah.
all. So that's really on you at this point. There's nothing I can do because people who have this type of profile, even if we're in person, they wouldn't really be your target audience. They're there because they have to be there, not there by choice.
Yeah.
And you try to focus on the other ones who actually want to make the most out of their time with you. Yeah, you have to be okay with the fact that there's always going to be a percentage of your audience that you're not really tailoring your content to because there's nothing to be done about that. And then the others who actually want to make the most out of their time, how do I make it worthwhile for them having taken that chunk of time out of their day?
Mm. And so there's another thing is theory versus practice and learning to do something and understanding it roughly through what you tell, the stories you tell or your own experience, and then getting them ready for the actual task. How do you bridge that gap right now?
Yeah. So and that's the eternal struggle of enablement, right? It's yeah, I can give you the theory, but at the end of the day, are you applying it? And in order to bridge that gap, really what we try to do is to have as many hands-on activities that really showcase how the theory should work in practice. So whether that is through role play and providing feedback of you did that well, you can improve on this, etc. That's part number one. And then part number two is if it's something more related to do my job sort of elements, it's all right. Let's take a look at something that you have going on right now, maybe an account you're trying to reach out to, blah, blah, blah. And let's put that into practice and develop something that's very specific to your day to day job that you can put into practice as soon as you leave this room and you're able to replicate that for other instances of whatever you may be trying to do. So it's really a mix of trying to bring those elements in order to put that other part of the mix, which is the theory, into practice and make it click in their heads that, oh, this is how I'm supposed to execute on that.
Gotcha. So there's the training bit and there's some kind of coaching and mentoring towards the end.
Yeah. And also just for the follow up bit, it's about, yeah, monitoring their growth after they come to one of the enablement sessions. And we're always open also to them reaching back out to us, whether they have questions, whether also obviously operating in such a big company, there's upside to it, which is we have a lot of resources, right? We have a lot of assets. So if they wanted to ask questions that are specific to a certain topic, we have subject matter experts that they can reach out to, which is not always the case if you're talking about a smaller company. It
Yeah.
needs to be centralized somewhere, and one person all of a sudden is a subject matter expert on everything. But how much can you learn about every single topic and be an expert and be able to help the rest of your organization? So it's more about in big companies being specialized and in smaller companies being a generalist where you're able to help out here and there, but you're not really a specialist in any topic.
So basically, there's no kind of limit to how much a new person at Salesforce could learn. It's more how much energy and commitment they will put into their own training.
Yeah, there's literally no limit. There's so much content that you can go through that you can spend years, literally years going through that content and still not be halfway done. Right. So, as I said, it's more about being a specialist. And that doesn't necessarily only apply to the enablers as such, but also in your role, you're hired to do something very specific. If you're in sales, for instance, you're hired to sell to a specific geography, to a specific industry, and to a specific segment within that industry. If you're one of these people who strive to always upskill and wants to go through a lot of enablement throughout your career, you're becoming a specialist in what you need to do because there's no time for you to become a generalist and know everything about everything, whether that is about the product, the industry, or soft skills in general. And I think soft skills might be like the best investment that you can make because those become transferable skills later on. But if you become a product expert, for instance, at Salesforce, how is that going to translate? Yeah, the inner workings and how a technology should work, but you really only know how it's done in one place. You want to be able to cast a wider net and be able to be a flex agent, I would say. You want to bank more on soft skills, which are more transferable if you plan on companies are moving roles or whatever it may be.
Gotcha. I hear what you say. If you are motivated, you choose and you keep growing. There's a pull and push dynamic where you want to be there for the people and prepare all the content so that you're ready for demand. At the same time, I guess you have targets across the organization where you need to improve performance overall. And so as an enablement team, you probably have a
Yep.
desire to get more people involved,
Yeah.
and you have the bell curve, right? So you have very few people who are actually interested. How do you do to get more of those guys who
Yeah.
want to become better and push for more when the bell curve applies?
Yeah. And that's something that is a kind of an issue for us right now that we're trying to solve. And it really comes down to marketing internally the programs that you have on offer, right? A lot of people, they don't necessarily pay too much attention to the internal communications that happen and therefore aren't even aware that these things exist. So it's about marketing that, putting it out there, having the resources, whether that is an internal website where you have everything laid out and people can track their progress, etc. Whether that is also through positive reinforcement, which means letting their managers know that they're signing up for different things and that they're upskilling on certain soft skills or certain hard skills, whatever it may be. And then the other thing is through that marketing, you have to understand who are your cross functional stakeholders. So, for instance, at Salesforce, we have people that sit right between enablement and sales. So, they try to understand what sales needs in terms of enablement. And then they go back to enablement and say, this is what we need. Develop content for that. Let us know what you've developed so that we can go market that to the end learners and let them know about the existence of these programs. So that is the bottom up approach of people signing up to whatever program you're offering. But it's also about targeting middle and frontline managers and saying, by the way, you seem to be dropping across those metrics. We have programs that tackle these metrics. How about you push for your business unit to go through that enablement in order to lift those metrics up for your entire organization?
Yeah, because I was going to say, when you started speaking about let the managers know, depending on how much time the course takes, and you have a manager who's short-term oriented, it's going to be like, I don't want these guys to take 3 hours. I would prefer them to be on the phone. So
Exactly.
that last one is really important. And it makes sense for me to get for more training if I'm really interested in sales. But if it's a job that I just need to have for 1 or 2 years, because then I want to become a marketing guy, that happens a lot in sales,
Yeah.
then I don't really care about getting trained. I just want to get the next job. So how do you identify what people truly want, what they resonate with, so that you actually line up the training for those guys?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that affects too much the decision making from an enablement side because those are not your target learners, right? Your job as an enablement organization is to deliver on what you're asked to deliver, and that is improving sales metrics. So, those outliers that want to join sales only to be there as a stepping stone for other career opportunities, these are not your target audience. You're not trying to build content for them, right? You're really only trying to build content for the sales organization, putting a methodology in place, having one philosophy for the entire sales organization, and then pushing for that to be adopted. Those people who are going to move roles, that's always going to happen. And if you're aspiring to change roles, nobody is going to hire you unless you can prove that you can do your job, right? So even if you are somebody who wants to move organizations or career path, right? You need to prove yourself first. In
Mm.
order to do that, you need to perform in sales, which is the job that you're given, in order for you to be able to apply to marketing and the manager saying, hey, that looks like somebody who might have an interesting profile, for instance, because they can do sales and they've upskilled on different things in parallel. But if you're somebody who's completely uninterested and not even trying to perform in sales, you're not going to get hired there either. So my advice would be prove yourself, even if it means that you have to attend trainings that might not be very interesting for you at the moment, you want to be able to say, all right, I'm performing in sales. I'm attending some sort of enablement in order to perform in my job. And if you have the bandwidth, then you can attend other enablement sessions that might be more targeted for your future step, right? But there's no point in doing that unless you're
Yeah, you
actually
need to do
proving.
your core job. Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense. And is there that discovery step when you join Salesforce of trying to understand what's your long-term career plan and what are your aspirations, personal aspirations? Maybe they're not the fit between your current role, but it's always a mean to an end. So I guess you might not be showing your cards so much if you don't feel safe.
Yeah.
So there's this first element. But if the organization gives you the ability to actually express yourself truly and say, hey, actually, I know I'm here. I'm going to do the best job I can, but my next step is there. And if you know this career path that they have in mind or the specific interest, because it could be sales, but I just want to sell to large customers,
Yeah.
not small business, but they're in a small business role because they can't do the large customer because they're too young, blah, blah, blah. So you get the point. So by understanding their true aspirations, then you can build the marketing based on that.
Yeah. I mean, from that perspective, it's really more about the manager's influence on the career path that you can have, right? So if you join, you're never first of all, you're never going to say that's my aspiration unless it fits with the career path of the job that you're applying for. So for instance, moving from sales in small and medium businesses to sales in large customers, then yeah, that is a standard traditional sales trajectory, I would say. And saying that upfront might just showcase that, yeah, I'm in it for the long haul. I want to do sales, and that's one thing, right? But if as you're interviewing, let's say for a role, you state those aspirations of, by the way, I want to end up in marketing, you're not getting hired. So that's something that you need to be aware of. How
Yeah.
are you portraying yourself and what kind of personal brand are you showcasing to the people that matter, to the decision makers in your current state? From an enablement perspective, you try to have something, especially in large companies like Salesforce, right? You try to have something that is tailored for every profile in sales because you want to have something that helps new sellers be able to perform in their jobs, but you want to have something that's relevant also for the guy that's been selling for 30 years and wants to either upskill on new technologies that are available or new trends in the market or in the industry. So you want to have something that speaks to that guy, but you also want to have something that speaks to the SMB. And that's not going to be the same content at all. What works for somebody who's junior in sales is going to be child's play for somebody who's been selling for 30 years unless it's something that's very specific to the company and they wouldn't have known elsewhere. So yeah, it's a balancing act on that front. But for the people who want to showcase or who have different aspirations, I would say, depending on the culture of the company that you work for, you might just join in sales, right? Do a year or so. And then it's fine to share with your manager saying, by the way, from my interactions with the different collaborators that we have across the business, for instance, I want to end up in marketing or I want to end up in UX. Who knows, right? User
Yeah. Yeah.
design, interface design, whatever it might be. It's fine to share that. So, for instance, in Salesforce, it's fine to share that. And I went through that personally, where I had a manager. I was like, "Listen, I want to end up in enablement. What do I need to do from this point forward in order to end up in enablement?" And it might be, I go attend a few sessions, go start learning the names of people who are in that organization. And so start building your network. So it really depends on the culture of the company, whether with your manager, because they are the person who are going to have the most impact on your career path, right? Aside from you, obviously, is depending on the culture of the company, how safe do you feel sharing your aspirations if they are a bit out of the traditional path, and versus how exposed you would feel if you were to share that and they're not super open to it.
Yeah. And it's so, for instance, psychological safety, is it something you teach or is it taught by someone like another enablement organization at Salesforce?
So this is something that is taught during onboarding, right? So as you join the company, we talk a lot about the values of the company. We talk a lot about the career path. We talk about who are going to be your collaborators, who are you going to have FaceTime with. So all of that kind of is baked into it. But psychological safety, yeah, it's touched upon, but it's not a topic of emphasis or a focus, I would say. It's just there. Yeah, we want you to feel comfortable, not only with your managers, but also with your peers, right? We want you to be able to bring your true self to work. And that's something that I think is very tech based, right? The entire tech industry kind of pushes for that. I don't know how it is in other industries, like in the construction industry, for instance. It's not the same. You have to
Yeah.
fit a certain profile. Yeah, it really depends on that, I would say.
Okay. And so you spoke about 3 hours training. How do you keep the energy for 3 hours? Yours
Yeah.
and the ones of the people listening to you. How do you manage?
Yeah. During the pandemic, there was a lot of studies and a lot of articles that came out related to what's the optimal way to do trainings remotely or in a virtual setting in general. And they tell you, all right, so don't have your learners sit in front of the screen for longer than 45 minutes. This is how long they should be before they take their first break. And then, so you try to implement a lot of that into your trainings. From my perspective, yeah, sure, that's interlace breaks in there. You have to be aware also of, for instance, here in EMEA, we're across different time zones, right? So you have to understand if people have to go to lunch, if people have different things that they need to be doing throughout the day. But it's also about structuring the content in such a way that it's interactive enough with your audience that you can still grab their attention 2 hours in or 2.5 hours in, right? So at the 2 hour mark, all right, we're going to do a role play activity where everybody's involved. We're going to go to breakout rooms, blah, blah, blah. So it's really about keeping them on their toes throughout the entire session, giving them enough breaks, interlacing the content of not too much theory with some practice, and then finding the right balance of all those elements in order to be able to deliver a training. From my perspective, yeah, keeping the energy up. Some days you have to deliver 2, 3 hour trainings in a row. And so that can get a bit tiring. And I think it's more about, on a personal side, it's more about empathy with the learners. Like they're also taking time out of their day to attend these trainings. And at the end of the day, it is my job, right? That's what I'm paid to do, is to be in front of them and deliver that content in the best way possible. So it's about that duty element alongside a whole lot of caffeine. There's that also.
Gotcha. And so you spoke about the fact that you chose to be in enablement after being in sales. What led you to decide this career path?
Yeah. That old saying about those who can't do teach, right? Uh, in my case, it was more about those who don't want to know teach. I really did not want to be in sales after 10 years of being there. It felt way too much, right? It's very stressful. It's something where at the end of every quota cycle, that might be monthly, quarterly, yearly, whatever. So you're doing your whole push throughout, and then you hit the day and you're like, great, but then it starts again, right? So at the end of the day, it was very tiring. It was very stressful. And also, I couldn't take the interaction with customers anymore. I think I have a very short life social battery, and just having to do that for hours on end and days on end and weeks and months and years, I think it just completely drained me. And I wanted to do something else. You might think that for somebody who's in enablement, what are you doing? Again, what are you doing being in enablement if you have to be in front of people the entire day? But it's not the same, right? Because the energy that you bring is not to necessarily convince them to buy something, even though you're asking them to buy into the concept of what it is you're teaching. But it's a different interaction, right? It's a different paradigm of you being in front of them. So that really gives me a lot of peace for myself, not having to
Yeah.
drain my social battery as much. And also the daily quality of life that comes from being in enablement versus being in sales. In sales, you might be making more money, sure, but you're stressed out all the time. And even when you're not at work, you're thinking about work. Whereas in enablement, you turn off your computer at the end of the day and that was it for the day. You're done. Right. So for me personally, quality of life, and especially now that I have a kid and another one on the way, I want to be able to spend quality time with them as opposed to having to unplug and be stressed all the time and not be the best version of myself. there is also that element that can.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. It's funny. I would have thought that you would mention your love for training at some point because you do.
Yeah, that was funny enough. That was, yeah. I think I focused more on why I wanted to leave sales more so than why I wanted to join enablement. You're right. From my
I mean,
perspective,
there's no forced answer, but I remember you teaching Spanish, and I remember
yes,
you were enjoying it. No one asked you for it. I think you proposed, and you kind of push
that
people to learn it. You
that's
were
true.
marketing the Spanish everywhere.
That's true though, especially for a non-native speaker, like
Yes.
spending so much time just giving Spanish classes. I remember at one point I had two different classes, one that was advanced and one that was beginner level. And I was spending more time on my Spanish preparation rather than my actual job. So yeah, and so I think subconsciously to a certain degree, I always enjoyed enablement as such and the teaching element of things, which is why I think later on I might want to go into academia as well. And I think that was a good transition out of sales and into academia. So there was that. And also, very randomly throughout the years, many people who I came in touch with from very different backgrounds and in very different situations, just in passing mentioned to me that, hey, you can explain very complex concepts in very simple terms. That's something that you should focus on.
Mm.
And I never really thought that about myself or never realized that about myself, even. But yeah, a lot of people told me that I have that tendency to be able to explain these concepts in a more simple manner. And I guess that plays a lot in enablement as well. You tend to be able to, you know, showcase that because if it's a concept that you're familiar with, especially that I do enablement for sales and I have been in sales for so long that I know the concepts and I'm able to put them into layman's terms or into simpler terms for people to understand. And I think also having a multicultural background helps me empathize a lot with different learners because when they ask a question, I know exactly what they're asking and I like being able to help out, right? So being able to help out in their native language as well just really helps
Mhm.
them understand the concept because I know why they're asking what they're asking. And at the same time, I'm able to act on it, right? Yeah, it's a mix of all of that.
In the rest of the enablement team, are they pedagogical experts, or are they all coming from sales?
So no, a lot of them are just enablement experts, right? They started their career in enablement. Some of them do come from sales, and then some of them they just come from a public speaking background, right? Not necessarily enablement, not necessarily sales, but just something that's more or less related to that. And the move to enablement is really about how quickly can you absorb concepts and how are you able to translate that for other people to understand, right? That is more or less the core skill of enablement. Then your style comes into play and other factors come into play, sure. But the crux and the core of it is can you absorb this concept within 2 days? Because we need to deliver that content in 3 days, right? So are you able to pivot and do that? And that's what you're after here.
Mm. And so, what's your process to do that? How can you teach that meta process?
Oh, the meta process, or how do I do that myself?
How do you do? That's gonna be the same answer, right? You're gonna be tending to some universality in that, no?
No, it's a very different one because the way that I work is very chaotic and people cannot like comprehend it. Yeah, no. I,
What
from
do
what
you do?
I no, I'm I'm a big procrastinator. So I tend to leave things for the last minute because in my head or the way I learn, last minute panic is the best kind of catalyst, right? For me to be able to say, all right, I don't have any other way out. I need to sit down right now and go through
That
this
that's
concept.
that's why they give you the assignments where you have only 3 days.
That's why they gave me those assignments, right? And that's why I enjoy them more because I don't have to be thinking about it for 3 weeks. Although I think what I've learned about myself is even though I'm not actively learning, for instance, let's say they give me something to learn for like in a month from now, right? I'm obviously going to do it the night before. But what I've learned about myself is throughout that month, in the back of my head, I'm structuring the content and I'm structuring a way for me to learn it more so than anything else. I know what I'm going to emphasize. I know what I'm going to spend some time on. And all of that kind of falls into place the moment that I sit down to actually go through that content. Whereas other people have to go through the steps physically of, all right, now I'm going to read this leads into step B, leads into step 3. I can't go through a process like this. For me, it's a brain dump, right? And so, yeah, my process is very different to what other people's process might be like.
So you're less of a control freak. You're more a surrender to the content kind of guy.
100%. A
So
hundred
it's
percent.
intuition. You're talking about intuition.
I don't know. Maybe it is intuition. Maybe it's laziness. I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know.
you're always taking the humility road. But to me, what you're describing is I crunch content. Like in flow, you have 4 steps. The first one
Mhm.
is to struggle. Like you take in information, you take into information. That's the most difficult part. Then you go for a release. So you take a shower, you go for a run, you go with your kid. And when you release, ideas whirring in the background. You detach from the content. And at that point, some connections happen in the back of your mind. That's exactly what
Yeah.
you were describing. And then you go into this eureka moment and you basically have the flow. And then you recover from it. And
Yeah.
so the problem is if your recovery is happening at the same time as you're supposed to deliver the content, that's a problem. But I guess you have enough time to recover before you deliver.
Yeah. It's surprising because that's pretty much my process, right? What I'll do is, for instance, as I'm given the content that I need to deliver, let's say in a month from now, I skim through it in 30 seconds, literally 30 seconds. I skim through it as I'm handed it over. All right. I know more or less what it's about. And then I'll disconnect for a month. And a day before I'm supposed to do it, everything falls into place. I know exactly what I need to focus on. I'll go through it in a bit more detail. I never do any kind of dry runs. I think those play against me more so than in my favor, simply because if I do a dry run and I use specific words or whatnot, when I do the live content, I'm going to be looking for exactly what I said during my dry run.
Yeah.
And that might, block me if I'm looking for a specific word that I can find or a specific sentence or concept that I put in. For me, it's more about I know what this should say. I know what learners need to take from it. And I put all of that together. And that's how I deliver my content.
I'm the same.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people work in very different ways. When I was a few weeks ago, I had to deliver a session. And sometimes when the session is a bit more complex and when there's a lot of activities or whatever, we'll have somebody as backup producer to do the breakouts and to post the links and to do all of that. And literally the night before, as I was going through the content, I made some changes and I pinged that guy who's going to be my producer. And I was like, by the way, this is gone. This is now in. This is gone. And he's, all right, would you mind if we spoke about it? Sure. We spoke live about it. And I told him, okay, so this is gone. You just need to make that change. That is gone. You just need to do that. And this is going to be modified, whatever. This is what the final version is going to look like. Great. So for me, the interaction needs to be about 30 seconds, right? And he was like, whoa, slow down, rewind. Let's go back to that first item on your list and tell me specifically what needs to happen there, right? And he's great at his job. And when you see him delivering the content, he's wonderful, but his process is extremely different to mine. He needs to take his time with it. He needs to write down the entire talk track, word for word. I would lose my mind if I had to do that, right? Yep. I,
Right now, I have to do this kind of thing as well because I'm working with someone else and my partner wants to know what's going to happen in the sessions so that I don't get too crazy. And so when you
yeah,
have this interaction, it's interesting. I've learned to do dry runs because of that. But
yeah,
I'm not a dry run guy either.
exactly. So it's really about what works for everyone. Yeah. I know that my process is very hectic and is very chaotic, and I don't try to impose it on anybody. So it's more about figuring out what everybody's preference is and trying to work towards that. And it's really about what motivates you, what you'd like to do. For me, I get more out of teaching something. And that's why I used to teach Spanish at Google. It's because I get a lot out of it. And also that empathy side of things, which is I'm not a native Spanish speaker. I happen to be able to pick it up, but I know what it's like for non-natives to learn the language. And so that's what I base my approach on is I know what you guys are going through. I know what stuff to learn. And so I can adapt my approach to what I know works and what will help people learn. And yeah, that's kind of
How,
what's top
how
of
do
mind.
you do not to forget what was your process of learning? Because usually you learn something and then the world changed in your mind and you're no longer able to access the state that you were in before you learned
Yeah.
because you changed. How do you manage to maintain that awareness?
I think it's through habit, right? Once you're in a particular state, if you're doing the thing that you're aware of right now in a repetitive manner. So, for instance, now I can absorb sales content very easily, right? Why? Because throughout 10 years, I repeated that process every single day. And now, even though I'm out of it and I don't have the stress of sales and I don't have a quota and I'm not working with any function that's related to sales at the moment, I still know what it's like, right? Even though it's been 3 years now that I'm out of sales, you might say it's a long enough time to not have that routine anymore. But because I learned it and because right off the back of it, I knew what it's like to teach salespeople, I can carry that with, me, right? I implemented it in my head as a structure of this is what they need to know. And so I applied it and I can keep that concept in my head. And as I shift and as I learn new things, some of the things that I used to deliver might not be as relevant. And you have to make headspace in your mind for new things that you're absorbing. And then hopefully it stays for a while with you and you absorb it as part of your approach, as part of who you are as a professional. And when you show up for work, what are the core concepts that you build your persona around? Yeah, that's at least that's my process.
And one thing that came earlier that I didn't ask you about, but to me, the most interesting part is soft skills. Actually, I don't like to talk about soft skills, but like the meta, I would call it the meta skills. Like
Yeah.
how do you create habits? How do you talk? How do you think? How do you manage your emotions? And those have, like you were talking about the multipliers for sales, those are like highly leveraged because the managing your emotion, it works for you at home, it works for you at work with the clients. So basically managing those skills unlocks a lot of rewards overall, and it will help sales, but every other activity. How much of this is currently part of the curriculum of what you teach at the onboarding specifically? But to me, this is, if I had to focus right now on enabling people from my company, I would try to do this mostly. And then I feel like the other ones are like layers of specific toolbox that they can use, but it's not that important. Do you share or how do you live this?
So I agree with your view on that, right? But the reality is very different. You have to think of it from a business point of view, right? So a business like Salesforce, they're hiring all of these account executives in order to sell, right? In order to increase revenue at the end of the day. And these soft skills or meta skills are not as immediately impactful as sales skills would be for that business. And so what they'd rather do is upskill everyone on what makes you right now an asset for the company and what is going to justify right now the salary that I'm paying you. Because if I'm paying you to train you on meta skills that would take time to materialize in your job, then I'm making an investment long term, knowing that you might leave the company at any moment. And that's what I want to try to avoid.
Yeah, I guess
And
also they are because they are what you said at the beginning, transferable. It's
Mhm.
actually making an investment towards something that makes people free.
Exactly.
Mm.
Now, at the end of the day, you might say that it's a zero sum game because these companies hire from one another, right? The person that leaves Salesforce will go to Meta or to Google, and then that person will go
Yeah.
to Salesforce. So it comes full circle to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But yeah, there isn't as much emphasis on those skills as there are on hard sales skills, I would say.
But I guess the thing is, at the root of your sales skills, you have meta skills. Like when you teach people to sell, you're teaching them to communicate, to listen more,
Yeah, of
to build a
course.
vision. It's just more contextual. I guess you
Yeah.
emphasize every time the context is there.
Yeah. So
Mm.
something like storytelling or impactful executive communication. Yes, these are meta skills because it's all about understanding your audience. How do you build a compelling story? What's important for them? How are you linking all of that together? But yeah, all of these kind of work together in the meta skills point of view, but also more immediately in sales because we're putting that in the context of this is your target audience and this is what you need to be telling them. So from that perspective, yeah, it's a mix of we're giving you those meta skills, but we're not saying it explicitly. So for some people, it might fly over their heads that they're learning that because they're focusing on the context and what makes them good at their job,
Yeah,
but they're not focusing on the subtext and reading between the lines of, hey, I can actually apply this elsewhere as well.
yeah. And is there coaching? I guess the coaching is on the managers, on the people managers.
So coaching, yeah, it's a bit too tiered because yes, the manager is there to coach you, but you can also approach anyone in the organization, somebody whose work style you like, whose ideas you like, or whatever it may be. And then just say, hey, would you mind being my coach for the next coming year or whatever? And then basically you'd have bi monthly or whatever meetings with them where you're like, all right, this is what I've done, this is what I'd like to achieve. How would you go about it? Any advice that you want to share? These are the things that, yeah, you're able to do at a company that's as big as Salesforce. Maybe within medium companies, you can still approach people. I've never been in a startup, so I don't really know how it would go there. I don't think people have enough time in their day in startups to be able to provide coaching as well to new joiners. Yeah. But if I wanted coaching right now, yeah, I could approach anyone in my organization and say, hey, would you mind being my coach for the foreseeable future? Because that's what I want to do.
That's a program at Salesforce. This is a package program.
It's not packaged. It's just there. Like it's an understanding that every employee has that you might be approached for coaching and you can approach others for coaching as well.
That's cool.
Yeah.
You're talking a lot about the resources available at Salesforce. You're the number one company for sales on the CRM side. What do you think you do that is really at the edge of innovative learning or innovative sales teaching, at least?
I think the availability of learning content is a big one because aside from the programs being very readily available for you to sign up to whatever you want and just attend that training, there's also so much wealth of knowledge packaged really well and gamified, which I think is a big one for people to want to consume that content is that if it is gamified, they're more likely to do, right? Understanding Salesforce and being upskilled on Salesforce can open opportunities for you in the job market because even people who are external to Salesforce can still go through all of that learning, get certified on Salesforce through that platform. And then there are a lot of companies who hire based off of those skills. They're looking for someone to manage either their relationship with Salesforce or to manage their instance of Salesforce or to upskill people internally on those things. So they've created such a wide network that people want to consume their content because there's value in that content. And packaging, coupling that with the fact that information is packaged and gamified, a lot of people are just consuming that content for the upside that there is of being a specialist in that. So
So,
yeah,
so, so the content is available for people outside of Salesforce.
yeah,
Oh, wow. Didn't
not
know.
all of it, not all of it. But if you go to trailhead.com, like there's so much content out there. You can even be certified as a Salesforce admin, being an external player to Salesforce, let's say. And if you decide to do that, a lot of companies will hire you based off of the fact that you are a Salesforce admin and they know that's worth something.
Cool.
Yeah. And I've met some of those people when I was in sales. I'd go into customer companies and I would be met by the Salesforce admin because they're the expert. They don't know more than me, by the way, about the platform, way more than me about the platform. in the details in how processes are mapped out and whatever. And yeah, and if you come out of Salesforce and you're fully upskilled on the ways of Salesforce, then there's a place for you in the job market.
And do you do the same for sales? Do you train salespeople through Trailhead?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the one that's gamified internally as well. So you can hit the rank of Ranger, double star Ranger, and 3-star Ranger. And that's a lot of time invested into enablement. And if you have that on your resume or on your profile or whatever, it shows that you're dedicated, at least if nothing else, to upskilling and to always
Yeah.
being in the know about things. Yeah.
So at Salesforce, you have massive legacy library because you've been doing this for 20 years. How do you navigate the library as an employee? How do you make it easier to navigate all those paths
Yeah.
for an onboarding person?
It's all searchable. So there is a massive library of what is called internally trails, right? And these trails, what they do is they are specific to certain topics. So if you want to learn, for instance, about executive communication, or if you want to learn about a specific product or solution, like you can search for Sales Cloud, for instance, and you'll get all of the different courses and trails that are related to that specific keyword that you searched for. And then you can upskill on whatever floats your boat, right? From meta skills, soft skills, all the way to solution and product specific courses. You can go through all of that. And then, depending on which organization you have internally, they also use a technology called HighSpot, right? So that allows you to create more or less libraries, and it's an intranet, let's call it, for Salesforce. And there are pages where you can go that are specific to, let's say, if you're in a specific industry or in a specific market or whatever, you can go to that page and you will find all of the content that's related to that specific thing, whether that is industry specific or whether that is product specific, whatever, you will find all of that content on there. So it's highly searchable and it's easy to use. It's not always easy to find, right? Because you have to actively want to find
You have
it.
to know, you have to know what you look for.
Exactly. And if you don't know what you don't know, then it's a bit harder. But other
Yeah.
than that, it's pretty straightforward, I would say.
Okay. Any advice for me? I'm doing retreats. My main focus is how to provide those meta skills and create a space for creativity.
Mhm.
Come, reconnect with yourself, and from a place of being grounded, centered on what your values and intentions are, create or self-develop, whatever between the two.
Yeah.
Basically, you enable people and then you give them time for their own project and then you enable them again. I think to give you a bit more details, I'm trying to do days where you have continuous training offerings, but they don't have to take them. Maybe the first one of the day and maybe one at the end, like dynamics that they do attend, but for the rest, they just take whatever they want. And for the
Yeah.
rest, they do work. So that's the context. If you have any tips or how would you run it?
From my perspective, I think one of the most important things that you can do is to keep the content flexible enough so that you can adapt your approach based on the audience that you have. Right? So within the context of what you're describing, you might get, let's say, a corporate retreat where everybody has a relatively similar profile and the content that you want to deliver is highly specific to that audience. So you might have something prepared, but you want to be able to tailor your approach to what you know works for them. So if you get a bunch of bankers, right, you're not going to treat them the same way as if you get a bunch of NGO workers, let's say. So you have to be able to deliver that same message, but the activities that you might use or the approach that you might use or when you're delivering that content within the journey that they're going to have in your retreat might differ. And so I think keeping that flexible option open for you is going to come in clutch. And also, it's really about, now that I think about it, you should have an understanding prior to the training of who your audience is going to be. So if you can have a set of questions or an interview even with your audience before they come so that you can cater to their preferences, I think personalization of that is going to be your main asset. You don't want to bring something that is too standardized. I think if people are approaching you, and especially on an individual basis, if they can say that, and obviously you're not going to be able to tailor your content to every individual, but you can say, for instance, during those couple of weeks, I'm going to have a lot of introverts, for instance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do away with all of the interactive activities that I have that are way too high energy, let's say, for somebody that's an introvert. And I'm going to replace them with something that they might actually enjoy instead. So that's one thing that you can do. And yeah, I think that approach is really going to net you a lot of positive feedback from people like that, as opposed because you're meeting them at their energy level, right? As opposed to you saying, by the way, this content where you're going to have a 3 hour session where you're going to be face to face with someone, you're going to have to talk to them for an hour now. That's not going to fly, right? Nobody's going to sign up to that training. And, or it might be something that might still be uncomfortable, but that might bring them out of their shells. And so you might want to sprinkle that here and there, like an improv class or whatever it might be. Yeah, I think from my point of view, that would be the main thing that I would focus on in terms of the content itself is how can I tailor it to whoever is coming? And from that point, how can I make the experience as enjoyable as possible for everyone?
And do you take part of the organization of offsites? Is it something you do?
No, typically that would be the executive assistants of some director that's doing that. But for our team, like for the small nuclear team, yeah, typically we take turns trying to organize an offsite. We all throw in ideas and we try to come up with something that would fit most of the team. Yeah.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So the offsites, and so I remember kickoffs at Google where we had sales training and stuff like this. Is it something that happens at Salesforce too? Like you do a big retreat or a big event, and you guys also plug, I don't know, 2 hours of training.
Yeah, we have a global kickoff, we have regional kickoffs, we have business unit kickoffs. And yeah, sometimes it's interlaced with enablement. A lot of the times is interlaced with what we call internally a V2 mom, which is vision, values, methods, obstacles, and measures thing. And it's basically your plan for the year, right? It's what's our vision for the year? How are we going to get there? What are the obstacles that we foresee? And what are the metrics that we keep an eye out on in order to measure our success? And now there's a push to start creating customer V2 models because you want to align. You don't want to be just solution provider, but you want to partner up with that company to help them
Yeah.
achieve success. And hopefully they become a return. V2 mom is a big part of it because it allows everybody to align on a vision.
Gotcha. And part of the ways to deliver the vision is to train the team.
Yeah, exactly.
When you go to a kickoff, you go away from the office environment and you leave something transformational. It's hard to do a stairway where you would take someone and for 10 years, you little by little, you make them grow. As an organization, it would be almost better or easier if you were saying, okay, we started there, V1, V2, V3, V4, and the team members do the same, right? And we all grow towards greatness. And in that process, those events are really important because it's like rite of passage. You're taken away from your day job. You are shaken up. It's over the top. So you have a lot of emotions. You can do some transformation and you go back better than you were before because you did that step change. Is it something that you feel at Salesforce is happening? And how do you do it through your own courses to make sure that people feel that they went there and like emotionally and intellectually, they did do a step up?
Yeah. I mean, from early on in the process, it's about the onboarding piece, right? So people joining, if they get to go to headquarters or to anywhere else, right, and be in that environment and have an immersive experience for a while, then yeah, you definitely get that rush and you get that high and you go back and you're like, yeah, I joined a great company. That's great. Let's go. Let's do whatever. When you're talking about virtual, it's a bit tougher. But what I've noticed at least is we were talking earlier about the bottom up approach versus the top down approach. If it's something that people choose to sign up for some programs, or if it's something that is mandated by their management that they should attend, we found that if management is there and if we include them in the process of either delivering the content or shaping the content, or even if it's just giving an intro at the top of the session of, hey, we're all here together. We're all going through the same training. This is an important topic. We need to step up our game. So if you have that kind of sponsorship from middle to high management, then that plays a big part in what we were describing right now of people feeling involved and feeling that they've gone through something. Otherwise, it's tough. Otherwise, it's tough. If you don't get that sponsorship and it's just people showing up, yeah, having them, it's more about how much impact did you have on them being able to perform properly in their day to day, right? Because if you've proven that to them,
Then they come back.
then they come back and then they feel that they've gone through something because as soon as they hit their desk, they're going, oh, I'm going to try to apply that because I just learned it. And I know that it's going to work because this is what's been missing from my approach, for instance. And if you're able to do that, then you're able to replicate to some degree that element of, yeah, I did go through something and it's great. I'm going to try to apply that.
Right now, you can't monitor actions at the team member level. You can't be looking at how they write the emails, how they talk on the phone. But with AI, give it 2, 3 years
Yeah,
and you'll have a bug on your computer and the bug will tell you, I'm using actually not now, but I use Poised. I don't know if you've heard about the AI tool called Poised.
I don't think so.
It records, it would know what I'm saying. And it tells you whether you speak too fast, whether you're empathetic, etc. And it just does it real time. And then it gives you a report at the end. I'll send you the link.
Yeah,
I've just
please.
tried it in 3 conversations. It's very interesting. But I'm guessing that what we're missing in enablement is the ability to know if people follow through. And you can't really do it at the moment. You
Yeah,
can look at metrics, but it's hard. And once you're going to be able to see, okay, this is the main pattern I've done. I'm expecting this pattern to be in emails and in calls. Is it happening? And
yeah.
once we're going to be able to monitor this, your role is going to be way more interesting in terms of knowing the outcome.
Yeah. Knowing the outcome and also being able to improve upon what you're doing, et
Yeah.
cetera, all of that is going to be great. At the moment, as you say, it's hard. And is even in identifying the trends of what's currently happening to know who you want to target. Even that bit is difficult. We try to do it through data of if that particular org needs training in this because we see their metrics drop and we're going to offer them these trainings. But if it's automated through AI and they know specifically what courses link to what skills, because that's also important, right? This is a map or a matrix that you have to create of these are the jobs or these are the programs that we have, but what are they actually impacting?
Yeah.
Because it's not always just face value. If I'm talking about impactful executive communications, it's not just that's being impacted. There's a lot of other metrics that are underlined in there that I can peg to that session. So understanding all of that also makes the whole heat map a lot more complex. And if AI is a tool that we can leverage for that, then great.